Chapter 8. The World's Greatest Investor. He is often called the world's greatest investor, but how do we know for sure? How exactly would one go about determining such a claim? It seems to me all we need to do is look at two simple variables, relative outperformance and duration. Both are needed. It is not enough to just beat the stock market over the short run. Countless people have done that at one time or another. Doing so over a long period of time is what counts. As Michael Mauboussin aptly describes in his book The Success Equation, Harvard Business School Press, 2012, there is a measure of both luck and skill in business, in sports, and in investing. And the only way to distinguish whether luck or skill prevails is by examining the results over time. Luck may play a role in the short run, but Father Time will let us know whether skill was involved. Here Buffett is unmatched. Warren Buffett's career managing money spans nearly 60 years. It is divided between the time he managed the Buffett Investment Partnership, Limited, 1956 to 1969, and the much longer period of managing Berkshire Hathaway, starting in 1965, the year he took control of the company. At the relatively young age of 25 with a relatively small amount of money, his own investment was only $100, Buffett started his partnership. Although the objective of the partnership was to generate at least a 6% annual return, Buffett set himself a much tougher goal, to beat the Dow Jones Industrial Average by 10 percentage points a year. He did much better. Between 1965 and 1969, Buffett grew the partnership at a compound annual rate of 29.5%, 22 percentage points higher than the Dow. An investor who put $10,000 in Buffett's partnership at the beginning and held it until the end would have netted, after Buffett's profit share, $150,270. The same amount invested in the Dow would have grown to $15,260. Over that time period, the Dow lost money 5 different years. Buffett made a profit and beat the index every single year. In those days, there were very few hotshot managers Buffett could compare himself to. Gerald Sy and Fred Carr, the two best-known mutual fund managers, burst on the scene in the mid-1960s near the time Buffett was thinking about shutting down the partnership. They built and then destroyed their reputations buying the 1960s go-go stocks. In one of Carol Loomis' earliest articles for Fortune magazine, titled The Jones Nobody Keeps Up With, April 1966, she compared Buffett's partnership performance to the famous hedge fund manager Alfred Winslow Jones. At the time, A.W. Jones and Company had a 10-year record, but Buffett had only 9 years managing money. Carroll examined the trailing 5-year returns for both investors and found that Buffett eked out the win, besting Jones 334% to 325%. But as Carroll pointed out, Buffett soon shut down his partnership, whereas Jones stayed in the game, suffering along with everyone else who could not see that stocks had become grossly overvalued. Putting aside the incredible track record of the Buffett Investment Partnership, the claim that Buffett is the world's greatest investor could easily hang on what he has accomplished at Berkshire Hathaway, as Table 8.1 makes clear. Over 48 years, between 1965 and 2012, the book value of Berkshire Hathaway has grown from $19 per share to a staggering $114,214 per share, a 19.7% annual rate of return. By comparison, the S&P 500 index, with dividends included, grew at 9.4%. In those 48 years, the S&P 500 index lost money 11 years, nearly 1 in 5 years. Berkshire posted just 2 negative years. On sheer numbers, then, superior performance sustained over long periods, it's hard to argue with the statement that Warren Buffett is the world's greatest investor. But what if we look beyond the numbers? The private Buffett. How should we think about a man who began managing money when Dwight Eisenhower was president and continues to play the game well almost 6 decades later? When he was not yet a teenager, young Buffett announced to anyone and everyone that he was going to be a millionaire by age 30, and if not, he would jump off the tallest building in Omaha. He was joking, of course, about the jumping off part, and even the millionaire ambition wasn't what we might expect. Today, He has far exceeded that youngster's goal, but those who know Buffett well know he cares little for the billionaire's lifestyle. He still lives in the same Omaha house he bought in 1958, he drives late-model American cars, and he much prefers cheeseburgers, cokes, and ice cream to fancy cuisine. His only vice is his beloved private jet. "It's not that I want money," Buffett has said. "It's the fun of making money and watching it grow." And, as we know from Chapter 1, these days he derives enormous pleasure from giving it away. In a world where patriotism is too often turned into a shallow cliché, Warren Buffett is unabashedly bullish on the United States of America. He has never been shy to express his belief that the United States offers tremendous opportunity to anyone who is willing to work hard. He is upbeat, cheerful, and optimistic about life in general. Conventional wisdom holds that it is the young who are the eternal optimists, and as you get older pessimism begins to tilt the scale. But Buffett appears to be the exception. And I think part of the reason is that for almost 6 decades he has managed money through a long list of dramatic and traumatic events, only to see the market, the economy, and the country recover and thrive. It is a worthwhile exercise to Google the noteworthy events of the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and the first decade of the 21st century. Although too numerous to list here, the front-page headlines would include nuclear war brinkmanship, presidential assassination and resignation, civil unrest and riots, regional wars, oil crisis, hyperinflation, and double-digit interest rates, and terrorist attacks, not to mention the occasional recession and periodic stock market crash. When asked how he navigates the treacherous episodes that can disrupt markets and inevitably scare away most investors, Buffett, with his folksy style, confesses he simply tries to be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. But I think there is much more to it. Buffett has a well-developed ability not merely to survive the dangerous times that make headlines, but to aggressively invest through these rough periods. The Buffett advantage. For years, academicians and investment professionals have debated the validity of what has come to be known as the efficient market theory. As you may remember from Chapter 6, this controversial theory suggests that analyzing stocks is a waste of time because current prices already reflect all available information, so, in a sense, the market itself does all the research you need. Those who adhere to this theory claim, only partly in jest, that investment professionals could throw darts at a page of stock quotes and pick winners just as successfully as a seasoned financial analyst who spent hours poring over the latest annual reports or quarterly statements. Yet the success of some who continually beat the major indexes, most notably Warren Buffett, suggests that the efficient market theory is flawed. Others, Buffett included, argue that the reason most money managers underperform the market is not because it is efficient, but because their methods are faulty. Management consultants believe successful businesses have 3 distinct advantages: a behavioral advantage, an analytical advantage, and an organizational advantage. Studying Warren Buffett, we can see each of these components at work. Behavioral advantage. Buffett tells us that successful investing does not require having a high IQ or taking the formal courses taught at most business schools. What matters most is temperament. And when Buffett talks about temperament, he means rationality. The cornerstone to rationality is the ability to see past the present and analyze several possible scenarios, eventually making a deliberate choice. That, in a nutshell, is Warren Buffett. Those who know Buffett agree it is rationality that sets him apart from the rest. "There were 1,000 people in my Harvard Law School class," Charlie Munger said. "I knew all the top students, and there was no one as able as Warren. His brain is a superbly rational mechanism." Carol Loomis of Fortune magazine, who has known Warren Buffett for over 50 years, also believes rationality is the single most important trait in his investment success. Roger Lowenstein, the author of Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist, says, Buffett's genius is largely a genius of character, of patience, discipline, and rationality. Bill Gates, a member of the Berkshire Hathaway board, likewise believes rationality is Buffett's distinguishing characteristic. This point was made demonstrably clear when the two friends spent an afternoon answering questions from students packed into an auditorium at the University of Washington in Seattle. One of the first questions a student asked was, "How did you get here? How did you become richer than God?" Buffett took a deep breath and began, "How I got here is pretty simple in my case. It is not IQ, I'm sure you will be glad to hear. The big thing is rationality. I always look at IQ and talent as representing the horsepower of the motor, but that the output, the efficiency with which the motor works, depends on rationality. A lot of people start out with 400 horsepower motors but only get 100 horsepower of output. It's way better to have a 200 horsepower motor and get it all into output. So why do smart people do things that interfere with getting the output they're entitled to?" Buffett continued. "It gets into the habits and character and temperament, and behaving in a rational manner. Not getting in your own way. As I have said, everybody here has the ability absolutely to do anything I do and much beyond. Some of you will, and some of you won't. For those who won't, it will be because you get in your own way, not because the world doesn't allow you." All who know him, and Buffett himself, agree, the driving force of Warren Buffett is rationality. The driving force of his investment strategy is the rational allocation of capital. Determining how to allocate a company's earnings is the most important decision a manager will make. Determining how to allocate one's savings is the most important decision an investor will make. Rationality, displaying rational thinking when making that choice, is the quality Buffett most admires. Despite its underlying vagaries, there is a line of reason that permeates the financial markets. Buffett's success is a result of locating that line of reason and never deviating from its path. Analytical advantage. When Buffett invests, he sees a business. Most investors see only a stock price. They spend far too much time and effort watching, predicting, and anticipating price changes and far too little time understanding the business they partly own. Elementary as this may be, it is the root of what distinguishes Buffett. Owning and operating businesses has given him a distinct advantage in analytical thinking. He has experienced both success and failure in his business ventures and has applied to the stock market the lessons he has learned. Most professional investors have not been given the same beneficial education. While they were busy studying capital asset pricing models, beta, and modern portfolio theory, Buffett studied income statements, capital reinvestment requirements, and the cash-generating capabilities of his companies. "Can you really explain to a fish what it's like to walk on land?" Buffett asks. One day on land is worth 1,000 years of talking about it, and one day running a business has exactly the same kind of value. Buffett believes the investor and the business person should look at the company in the same way, because they both want essentially the same thing. The business person wants to buy the entire company, and the investor wants to buy portions of it. If you ask business people what they think about when purchasing a company, they are likely to answer, how much cash can be generated from the business. Finance theory dictates that, over time, there is a direct correlation between the value of a company and its cash-generating capability. So, to make a profit, the business person and the investor should be looking at the same variables. In our view, says Buffett, investment students need only two well-taught courses: how to value a business, and how to think about market prices. The stock market, remember, is manic depressive. Sometimes it is wildly exciting about future prospects and at other times it is unreasonably depressing. Of course, this creates opportunities, particularly when shares of outstanding businesses are available at irrationally low prices. But just as you would not take direction from an advisor who exhibited manic depressive tendencies, neither should you allow the market to dictate your actions. The stock market is not a preceptor, it exists merely to assist you with the mechanics of buying or selling shares of stock. If you believe that the stock market is smarter than you are, give it your money by investing in index funds. But if you have done your homework and are confident that you understand your business, turn off the market. Buffett is not glued to a computer, watching every uptick or downtick on the screen, and he seems to get by just fine without it. If you plan on owning shares in an outstanding business for a number of years, what happens in the market on a day-to-day basis is inconsequential. You will be surprised to discover that your portfolio weathers nicely without you constantly looking at the market. If you don't believe it, give yourself a test. Try not to look at the market for 48 hours. Don't look at your computer or cell phone, don't check the newspaper, and don't listen to a stock market summary on television or radio. If after 2 days your companies are well, try turning off the stock market for 3 days, and then for a whole week. Pretty soon you will be convinced that your investment health will survive and your companies will continue to operate without your constant attention to stock quotes. After we buy a stock, we would not be disturbed if markets close for a year or two, says Buffett. We don't need a daily quote on our 100% position in See's Candies to validate our well-being. Why then do we need a quote on our interest in Coke? Very clearly, Buffett is telling us that he does not need the market's price to validate Berkshire's common stock investments. The same holds true for individual investors. You know you have approached Buffett's level when your attention turns to the stock market and the only question on your mind is, has anybody done anything foolish lately that will allow me an opportunity to buy a good business at a great price? Just as people spend fruitless hours worrying about the stock market, so too do they needlessly worry about the economy. If you find yourself discussing and debating whether the economy is poised for growth or tilting toward a recession, whether interest rates are moving up or down, whether there is deflation or disinflation, stop. Give yourself a break. Buffett is a casual observer of the economy, but he dedicates no significant time or energy analyzing with the intent of predicting what the economy will do. Often investors begin with an economic assumption and then go about selecting stocks that fit neatly within this grand design. Buffett considers this thinking foolish. First, no one has economic predictive powers any more than they have stock market predictive powers. Second, if you select stocks that will benefit only in a particular economic environment, you inevitably invite turnover and speculation. Whether you correctly predict the economy or not, you'll find yourself continuously adjusting your portfolio to benefit in the next economic scenario. Buffett prefers to buy a business that has the opportunity to profit regardless of the economy. Of course, macroeconomic forces may affect returns on the margin, but overall, Buffett's businesses are able to profit nicely despite the vagaries in the economy. Time is more wisely spent locating and owning a business that has the ability to profit in all economic environments than by renting a group of stocks that do well only if a guess about the economy happens to be correct. Organizational advantage. Winston Churchill, addressing the House of Commons in 1944 in a building that had sustained heavy damage from airstrikes the day before, said, "We shape our dwellings, and afterwards the dwellings shape us." This eloquent truth, beloved by generations of architects, also helps us understand the shape of Berkshire Hathaway and its builder. As we dissect the Buffett advantage, it's helpful to look at the organizational structure of the company he has built. When Buffett bought his first share of Berkshire Hathaway for $7, I am not sure he had a grand vision of what Berkshire would become a half-century later. But as Churchill predicted, the company did indeed reflect the characteristics of its architect, and Warren Buffett the investor epitomizes the characteristics of his company. The success of Berkshire Hathaway rests on three fundamental pillars. First, the company's subsidiaries generate mountain loads of cash that are sent upstream to corporate headquarters in Omaha. This cash comes from the float of its massive insurance operations as well as the cash-generating capabilities of its non-financial wholly owned subsidiaries. Second, Buffett, the capital allocator, takes this cash and reinvests it into more cash-generating opportunities. This in turn allows him to buy still more cash-generating businesses, which generate cash, which allows him to. I am sure you get the picture. The last pillar is decentralization. Each of the subsidiaries is managed by very talented operators who need no help from Buffett to run their businesses. All for the better, as this allows Buffett to focus nearly 100% of his energies on capital allocation, his best talent. Buffett's management manifesto can be summarized as hire well, manage little. today. Berkshire Hathaway is a company with 80+ subsidiaries and more than 270,000 employees, but the corporate headquarters is staffed by just 23 people. The architecture of Berkshire Hathaway has led to something that is more powerful than a simple business strategy, says William Thorndike, author of The Outsiders: 8 Unconventional CEOs and Their Radically Rational Blueprint for Success. Buffett has developed a worldview that at its core emphasizes the development of long-term relationships with excellent people and businesses and the avoidance of unnecessary turnover, which can interrupt the powerful chain of economic compounding that is the essence of long-term value creation, wrote Thorndike. Thorndike believes Buffett is best understood as a manager/investor, philosopher whose primary objective is turnover reduction. Why? Because there is a cost to turnover, and I am not speaking just of trading commissions and capital gains taxes. In Buffett's mind, the cost of turnover is more human in nature. If you have assembled the best businesses, run by some of the best managers, financed by some of the best shareholders, why would anyone want to disrupt a long-term value creation that comes from this potent combination? Learning to think like Buffett. In the 20-some years I have been writing and lecturing about Warren Buffett and his unparalleled success. One comment I hear often is some variation of this: well, if I had his millions I could make lots of money in the stock market, too. I never understood this thinking. If you follow the logic, what they are saying is you first have to be rich before you can achieve the talents of becoming rich. But I will remind readers that Buffett developed a unique investment process long before he made millions, much less billions. I am going to do my best to convince you that, within your own financial parameters, there is no reason you cannot achieve Buffett-style success, if you integrate his tenets into your thinking and base your investment decisions on them. I can guarantee that you can start with $100 and end up many years later with billions, but I can guarantee that you will do better than someone with the same financial resources who depends on any one of the many speculators' schemes floating around. So let's walk through the steps, using a hypothetical situation. Let's pretend that you have to make a very important decision. Tomorrow you will be given an opportunity to pick one business, and only one, to invest in. To make it interesting, let us also pretend that once you have made your decision, it cannot be changed and, furthermore, you have to hold the investment for 10 years. Ultimately, the profit from this enterprise will support you in your retirement. Now what are you going to think about? Business tenets. Is the business simple and understandable? You cannot make an intelligent guess about the future of your business unless you